First Step Act, 2 years later. So with all this talk about reformation in our criminal justice system, let's take a look at a bill that skipped over our consciousness 2 years ago. Because I had no idea what the hell it was, and neither did you, so don't even try to lie, but we're going to break it down, so it's all good. December of 2018.
The Senate has overwhelmingly approved a criminal justice reform bill. Nicole Killian looks at what this means for current federal prisoners.
Has been agreed to.
The Senate vote came Tuesday night. In a rare show of bipartisanship, senators voted 87-12 to approve the First Step Act.
The First Step Act. So how has that worked out for us? Let's break it down. So the First Step Act works retroactively with the Fairness Act, which you don't know what that is either, so just go Google that and then come back and watch this video. But basically, it means that it overrides the reforms enacted by the Fairness Act of 2010.
President Obama signed a new law at the White House today that will close the long-disputed gap in federal sentencing for crack versus powder cocaine. Since 1986, defendants caught with 500 grams of powder cocaine have gotten the same punishment, 5 years in prison, as defendants convicted of possessing only 5 grams of crack cocaine. That's a sentencing ratio of 100 to 1. The new law reduces that dramatic disparity, cutting the ratio to about 18 to 1.
The Fairness Act helped to reduce the difference between crack cocaine and powder cocaine, but, and this is a big but, it would only apply to individuals who were federally imprisoned after the act was put in place. So then, the First Step Act came into place and gave all those benefits to inmates who were convicted harshly under the disparities before 2010. You good? You keeping up? Okay. So, what does the First Step Act bring to the table? Well, it expands the safety valve, which means that judges are allowed to sentence a person below the mandatory minimum term if certain conditions are met. Okay? It eases the 3 strikes rule so people with 3 or more convictions, including for drug offenses, automatically get 25 years instead of life. I mean, about time. It restricts the current practice of stacking gun charges against drug offenders, which ends up possibly adding decades to prison sentences. And it also allows for good time credit and earned time credit by that of good behavior and participating in vocational and rehabilitative programs. So those credits will allow these inmates to be released to halfway houses or home confinement, right? And not only should this help with like overcrowding of the prisons, but also hopefully through the education programs, it lessens the chances of repeat offenders. So that gives them the support they need to get back on track. And speaking of release, the First Step Act may allow a few thousand inmates to be released each year. Yeah. But 1,700 people are already released from prison every day. So I guess it's like adding a couple more release days each year. Yay? Now, also important to note that not everyone qualifies for the benefits of this act. For starters, undocumented immigrants would not benefit from this bill. And remember when we said gun charges were stacked on top of petty crimes, which ups the sentencing, and now they're violent, so violent offenders would also not benefit from this bill. But let's put a pin in that for the moment.
The First Step Act tried to fix that by changing the sentencing policy going forward, but it stopped short right there.
For a lot of your clients, it doesn't necessarily have an impact. Why is that?
Major sections of the First Step Act, as it relates to sentencing reform, were not made retroactive. We roughly estimate 40% of the life without parole populations for drugs are 3 strikes.
That are currently incarcerated.
That are currently set to die in federal prison under laws that are no longer in place.
So here's something important to remember. The First Step Act only affects federal prisons. Now, this is important because federal prisons only hold about 226,000 out of 2.1 million prisoners, okay? Still not small, but that only equals about 13% of mass incarceration. I mean, 13%. And that's between the 3 that hold the most: federal prisons, local jails, and state prisons, which take up like more than 50% of that pie chart, with 1,291,000 out of that 2.1, which means the First Step Act isn't even gonna touch it, right? And if you look at the graph of the state and federal prison populations from the last few decades, you'll see a dramatic spike in the 80s with a slow decline leading us into 2020, and that's all nice and dandy, except if you look closely at the graph, you'll see this decline started in 2009 due to reformation bills of that time. So really, overall, we aren't seeing much of a decline from our current trajectory as a result of the First Step Act. basically putting a small ripple in the ocean, basically.
We spoke to an inmate in Georgia who is one of many serving life without parole under the 3 strikes law. He learned that some of those key elements aren't retroactive. Why is that?
To make this bill bipartisan, we had to draw it in narrow terms. If it were too expansive, we would have lost people on the right. If it were too restrictive, we would have lost people on the left. The fact that anything was passed and signed, I think, is nothing short of a political miracle.
So there you have it. Seems like Kevin was right. It's about politics, and too often, the people get overlooked.
Does it not strike you as kind of wrong that there are people serving life in prison under laws that we have said are wrong?
That's why we call it the First Step Act.
How is a decision made? Well, the system is using an algorithm to decide who can cash their earned time credit from the bill. So basically they've left this up to a computer with built-in requirements, which is accidentally causing racial biases within the system. Okay. So we're gonna throw that up there, right? So if you built in a list of rules, but those rules were disproportionately linked to crimes statistically committed from minority offenders, then how much have we really helped the problem? I mean, I'm really asking you. I mean, basically what this bill does is come up with a solution to a problem that it hasn't admitted it has yet. It says nothing about racial biases in the judicial system and creates a new list of rules that, although are positive, really are just a small step forward. But hey, it was appropriately titled the First Step Act. So, yeah, what do you think? Do you think the First Step Act was a success? Do you think it's at least a good first step? Or do you think it's just some more smoke and mirrors? You know, we would love to know your thoughts on it, or your complaints on it. So get in that comment box and like this video and share it to all your friends and family and blow up their phones and give it to everybody. I'm sure they'll love you for it. And thanks for watching our video.